Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about county and local histories, in particular as they relate to your ancestors' fan club. Now, those of you who aren't familiar with the term fan club, we're going to talk about that briefly, and then I'll show you where you can find those family and local histories and how to use them. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with a definition of a fan club. A fan club is a term that was, I believe, coined by Elizabeth Shown Mills, and she talks about how in order to find your ancestors, a lot of times you need to understand more about their family, their associates, and their neighbors. So FAN, Family, Associates, and Neighbors, is their fan club. Just an easy little acronym to help you remember. But the idea is that sometimes when we hit those brick walls in our family history, it's because we haven't learned enough about the people around our particular ancestor. So you can't just be looking for the parents and the parents and the parents. Sometimes you have to branch out to other family members, brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, aunts and uncles, children, grandchildren, in-laws. So who is the family of this individual? Not only does that help establish their identity and tell the complete family story, very often it's through the records of those people that you're able to make new discoveries about your own ancestor. Now, associates are people they do business with, people they worship with, people that they have migrated with, lots of different people that are associated with them in their life. Some of those associates might be close associates, people with whom, people for whom they're godparents of their children, or people whose legal documents they sign as witnesses. For some, it might be more loose associates, someone in the same congregation, even someone living in the same town or county. So a lot of times just understanding more about the lives of those people helps lead you to the information about your ancestor. And then the final acronym letter there in the fan club is the neighbors. Neighbors, people who live and migrate with your ancestor. A lot of times when I'm looking at a census, I'll make sure I look at everybody on the census page, and sometimes a page or two before and a page or two after, because I want to understand the community that they live in particular the neighborhoods that they're living in. I'll use maps and look at how those pieces of property relate to each other, whose property adjoins theirs. Again, lots of details there, but it helps, especially as you get back into the early 1800s, the late 1700s, back into the 1600s, when you're doing your family history research, where the kinds of records that we use when we're doing 1900s genealogy research, like census records and sometimes some of those easier military records, birth, marriage, and death records, those things become less and less available the further back in time you go. And so you have to kind of branch out your research to this fan club in order to understand more about your ancestor. Well, so that is kind of the overview of what a fan club is. Now let's talk about specifically county and local histories as a way to get to some of these fan club people. On Ancestry, if you are not familiar with it, my favorite resource is the card catalog. You're going to find the card catalog here under the search button. If you just click on search and scroll down here to card catalog. Now, there are two specific ways to find the county and local histories on Ancestry. One is you can just type in the name of the county or the name of the town that you're interested in order to see what Ancestry has available. So I can come in here, for example, and I can type in Ashland and click search, and it tells me there are 7 databases on Ancestry or groups of records on Ancestry with Ashland in the title. Now, my family happens to be from Ashland, Ohio. We've got Ashland counties in Kentucky. It looks like there might be one in Wisconsin, a town named Ashland in Massachusetts, but my family's from Ashland, Ohio. So there is a local history written. It's not just for the county of Ashland. It is for north central Ohio, and it includes Richland, Ashland, Wayne, Medina, Lorain, Huron, and Knox counties. Now, I've told you this before, but you might have missed it, so I want to make sure I just reiterate. Anytime you come to a new database on Ancestry, I always encourage you, before you search, to scroll down to the source information. Now, this just tells you a little bit about this publication so that you can understand what it is that you're working with. In this case, this publication was originally published in 1931. So that gives you an idea of the time period that you're dealing with and what kinds of things you can start to expect as you search in that particular collection. Now over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see a browse box. Browse boxes for censuses and immigration lists and different kinds of records on Ancestry where we have images usually have drop-down lists that you can select from. Browse books for these county and local histories actually just list the table of contents for that particular publication. So you'll see here the table of contents, and if I make it a little bigger for you, this table of contents includes front matter and the title page and the table of contents. There is a historical index, so I always look for an index in a book so that I can understand the book, so that I can see if my family members are listed, so I can see who in the community is included. There's a biographical index. Now, many of these county and local histories, and you're going to see here in a minute as we go through this table of contents, have a lot of historical information about the area, but they also have biographies of prominent people in those communities. And again, even if your ancestor wasn't one of those people, these are the people of influence in their communities, and learning more about them might lead you to records about your ancestor or help you piece together information about the community in which they were living and working and worshiping and raising their families. That contextual information really helps flesh out that family story. So there is a biographical index in this collection, or in this volume. Now, you'll also notice then, like I said, there's going to be some historical information. Things oftentimes about the natives to the area, or who was there before white settlers came to that area, the creation and the organization of those counties, when they were settled, how the boundaries were formed, some of the early settlements. You'll see things about any significant events that occurred in the area throughout the time period. You'll see things like waves of settlement. So who were the first settlers, but then were there also major waves of settlement into that area? For those of you with different ethnic backgrounds, German, Irish, Swedish, whatever the case may be, as people came or immigrated from Europe, oftentimes they would come in clusters or in waves to particular areas of the United States. And so we start to see some of that discussed, those waves of immigration and how people settled and how that area grew. There's also oftentimes entire sections about the schools of the area. That's always really interesting to me to read, to understand when did they start formally educating their children? How was that structured? Very often I have found lists of names of the students, names of the teachers. Sometimes there's one volume from upstate New York where I made the discovery that it was one of my relatives who actually was the first school teacher, and the school had been funded by the family of another set of my relatives in the same area. And so there was this interesting connection between one family of mine and another in my ancestry, and how one built the school and one was the school teacher there. So that's always interesting. There's usually going to be a section about the local churches. That's really, really important to understand. If I could give you one piece of advice this whole time we have together today, it would be to understand more about the churches in the area. When were they established? Who wrote the charters? Who were the ministers? How long was that church in existence? Because prior to the early 1900s, here in the United States, most birth, marriage, and death records were kept by the local churches. And so understanding, what possible denominations existed, when those churches were built, who the ministers were, is going to lead you to the records that might exist about when your ancestor was born, when they were married, and when they died. Sometimes those records have never been digitized or put online. And so understanding that, this was the local Baptist church and this was the minister, then you can look in local archives in that county for the papers of that minister that oftentimes will list the baptisms or the burials or the marriages that he performed. The other thing to keep in mind is that just because you are a particular denomination, and just because maybe you have this family history of always being Catholic or always being Mormon or whatever the case may be, doesn't mean your ancestors were that thing. And so again, understanding what denominations existed in the time and place where your ancestor lived is critical to discovering more about them and to learning more about their lives, and sometimes to discovering those vital record events that were kept by the churches. Back in these books, we also often have information about military history, who served in which conflicts over time from that particular community, and then if there's anything unique about that community. In this case, this particular area of Ohio was very important to the Underground Railroad, as the escaped slaves from the South were coming up through into the North, sometimes all the way up into Canada. So in this particular volume, we have information about the Underground Railroad. Excuse me. So then there's also just information about, whatever else the community or whoever it was that published this volume felt was important. In this case, we've got information about what the local professions were. We've got information about the local newspapers. Also really important to understand. Just because a newspaper is being published today and it says it's been published for 100 years, doesn't mean there weren't other newspapers being published in that time and place that may have only run for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And knowing about the existence of those newspapers so that you can go look for them, again, could lead to really critical information. We think we have privacy or issues today. One of the things that our ancestors had were these little local newspapers that very often reported the comings and goings of everyone in town. Who was visiting who and who had dinner at whose house and when the babies were born and who got married and who came to visit. There's just so much information in some of those local newspapers. And sometimes the only record that I have ever found of a divorce or a baby's birth or a marriage was from some of those local newspapers. So understanding those, what newspapers existed, sometimes is found in these county and local histories. Then there's just information again about some of the, as we move into higher education, as colleges and universities are established, some of the arts. And then sometimes, like in this instance, this particular book covers several counties of north central Ohio. You'll have a section that's specific to each county and some of the things unique about that particular county. So every book is different. This is just an example, but always look through that table of contents so that you understand how the book is structured and what the book contains. Now, every one of these table of contents links is fully clickable. So for example, my family in Ashland County, I can come in here, click on this link. It will jump me to the place in the book that is for this specific county or this specific chapter of the book that I'm interested in. You're going to get a film strip down here along the bottom. It's much like a reel of microfilm. If you're familiar with doing genealogy research in the old days with the microfilm, this film strip just allows you to quickly jump to images. But if you want to have more screen real estate to be able to read, you just click the little hide film strip button. That drops that right down. You do have your image manipulation tools over here, so you can zoom in and out. There are some things you can do to lighten and darken the images and reverse them if somehow something's flipped sideways or something. Different books, sometimes they'll have like a picture or a map and they're oriented a little bit differently. Well, we've scanned the book just straight through, and so sometimes it's useful to be able to rotate that image as necessary. And then you can just use the little arrows here to read your way through the book. Now, I've happened to have read this entire chapter because it's about my family. I have read this book kind of in fits and starts as I've been looking for things about this area and trying to understand a little bit more about how it was settled and how that related on a timeline to when my family came. You can also search these books. Now, one of the things that I would encourage you to search them, but also to browse. Make sure you do both, because almost every one of these books was indexed, meaning it was made searchable by OCR. OCR stands for Optical Character Recognition, which is essentially just that a computer read the book and then turned whatever the words are that it picked up into an index. And part of the struggle or the challenge with OCR is it's only as good as the image. The cleaner the image, the clearer the OCR, the better the index. The fuzzier the image, or if there's artifacts on the image, it gets a little bit trickier, and sometimes the quality of the index goes down a little bit. The other thing is the computer is just reading a page of words at a time. The computer doesn't know that these two words are a name. And so while we give you name search fields here, they're a little bit, it's just looking at this bag of words that this computer created out of this page of text and saying, yes, both of these words exist on this page. So you might do a search for John Smith, and John might be at the top of the page and Smith might be halfway down the page, because it's just looking, are these words on this page? So keep that in mind when you search these particular volumes, that it gets a little trickier that way. Now, in my case, my family that lived there is Cowan, and so one of the things that I often do is just search for just a last name in some of these volumes to see who pops up. Sometimes the less information you put in the index, especially at this database level, the more successful your search is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and just put in Cowan and click search. I get 9 search results, and you'll notice I get little snippets that highlight the word that I searched. And I can see here this is mostly about John Cowan and J.P. Cowan. John and J.P. are the brothers of Robert, and Robert is my 2 times great-grandfather. 3 times great-grandfather, and so this is about his family. His one brother was a doctor, he was the postmaster, another brother was actually a congressman. There's some information here about Blanche, who is their sister. So there's some information here that might be of interest to me that I want to go read and understand specifically about my family. Now, if you do a search and your family does not come up, that doesn't mean you move on to the next thing. If you know your family was in this time and in this place, read it, right? Spend the time to understand about the community. Couple of reasons why. One is they may actually be listed by name, and the OCR just didn't catch it. You can see here how sometimes the typeface gets a little bit fuzzy, and sometimes the computer, if it's not crisp, the computer misreads it. And so you don't want to miss that. Also, if you've done a search by first name and last name, one of the things I've discovered in a lot of these books is that people are oftentimes recorded by just their initials. So if you've done a last name only search, then sometimes it catches it. But if you try to do a search, if I had searched for him by the name of Jacob, which is his first name, then this particular page wouldn't have been found because he's only listed by his initials. And I see that a lot, so keep that in mind as well. Another reason why you might want to read the book or go through that table of contents and pick out parts of the book that you want to read as opposed to searching is just because you get that context. Like I said, you start to understand who were the people that were in their neighborhoods, who were the people that they were associating with in their schools, in their churches, in their businesses, in their community. And then as you start to become familiar with those names and those families, then when you go doing research into the genealogical records, the censuses and the military records, you start to recognize some of those other family names. You know you're narrowing in on your person. I'll tell you right now, I have done a lot of research into the community of one of my brick wall ancestors, and because of it, I've become very familiar with the neighbors. It's a place I knew exactly where he enlisted in the Civil War in Iowa. And so I was researching that community, reading one of these particular family and local histories. And through that, I became really familiar with these families. Well, I knew he had come from a different state. So I knew that he wasn't from Iowa, that he had come from Ohio. So I was trying to figure out where in Ohio he was from. And there were a lot of men with the same name and the same time and the same place. And because I had studied this community in Iowa, even though the only record I could find him mentioned in was a Civil War enlistment record, all of a sudden I found this community in Ohio where a lot of these same families were. And so it looked like several members from this community had migrated to this community, and so I was able to zero in on the correct community in Ohio where he had come from. And all of that with only one record that actually listed my ancestor's name. So one of the things you have to start to think about, especially when you hit those brick walls, is investigating or understanding more about the community. Ancestry has more than 20,000 databases that are categorized as histories, family histories, local histories, county histories, community histories, and using that card catalog to search for them is the fastest way to get there. I will show you one final tip here before we sign off. If you don't want to use the search field, or if the search field doesn't find what you're looking for, in the card catalog you can actually filter by collection type. So if I scroll down here, you're going to see there is a collection type of stories, memories, and histories. And if you click that, you can then narrow it down to social and place histories. And that's going to show you a listing of all of these books that we have. And then you can then filter it down or narrow it down by specific location, by country, then by a particular state, and then sometimes within the state even by a specific county. And so even though these particular titles, you'll notice here, only one of the three lists Kent County. So if I had done a search for Kent County or Kent to get to this Delaware collection, there's only one of them. But there are two family histories. Actually, one is a family history and one is a local history that also contain information about Kent County and some of the families in that area, but the word Kent isn't actually in the title. So search by title for the county name or the town name or the state name, and then use those filters to narrow down, or just start straight with the filters, and you're going to find those family, local, and county histories under stories, memories, and histories, then social and place histories, and then filter further down to get to the specific location that you are interested in. Hopefully you will find that useful. If you do, I would love to hear about it in the comments, what success you're having. If you have any questions about the things we've talked about today, again, please leave a comment here on the YouTube channel under the video. I do monitor those and respond as necessary. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.